Hi, I'm Jerry Smith, a 55-year resident of DeKalb County, a local boy from Dixon, Illinois, and I've been asked to chat a little bit about the life of Jerry Smith. And I have never done something like this before, but I would be delighted to try to do that in an attempt to preserve some of our history. And I must commend Jim Barker and others who have started this project to do this, because I think it is important in our community to share with some of our younger people some of those who have come before them. And at age 73, my mind is, I think, is still good, and so I'm delighted to chat about the life of Jerry Smith today. I'm going to probably be chronological, if you will. It makes the most sense to do it in this way. I was born in 1943 in Dixon, Illinois, and my childhood, to put it bluntly, was a mixed bag. My mother and dad were divorced when I was very young. I was her first child, and for a good share of my early life, I was raised by my grandmother and my mother. I'd like to share a few pictures with you, if I may. This here is a picture of my mother, and that's me there, the largest of the two boys. The other one is my brother Jeff, who's still living, still lives in Dixon. And as a matter of fact, my mother is 97 years old, still as sharp as can be. And I'd like to chat about my mother, Freda, a little bit later as we go along in my life chronologically. So my grandma and my mother raised us boys on the corner of 9th and Galena in Dixon. Now, if you were to drive to 9th and Galena today, you will find that that is the parking lot for the Ronald Reagan House, which is up near the corner of 9th and Hennepin in Dixon, Illinois. My grandmother and my mother, raising us boys, lived in a very small home on 9th and Galena. In the backyards, in the facing backyards, was this home on top of the hill, and that was where Ronald Reagan had lived as a boy. Now, when I was growing up, nobody in that neighborhood, or perhaps nobody in Dixon, knew that that's where Ronald Reagan had lived. We just always considered it a home where a number of folks lived. If you go to Dixon now and see that home, which has been restored and which has been purchased by folks in Dixon and is now a National Historic Place as the boyhood home of Ronald Reagan, you'll see on the north side of the house there's a long side yard, and that's where we used to play football all the time. So anyway, my brother and I were raised in Dixon. My mother worked at the shoe factory and worked very, very hard. My mother remarried, and so for about 3 or 4 years, when I was probably in about second, third, fourth grade, in that scenario, we had moved to the Ashton area. We lived on a farm. Unfortunately, the gentleman that my mother was married to was abusive. And so as a child, my brother and I were knocked around physically. And, I like to think to this day that I don't think that had any adverse effect on how I lived my life. As I raised my son later on in my life, if I made any decision, perhaps it was to give him a little bit more space, to treat him a little bit kinder, because I recall some of those days of being knocked around and knocked off a tractor and hit with tools, and not a very happy experience. However, my mother did the right thing, decided that for my brother and for myself, for our sake, that she'd divorce. This was her second husband. We moved back to Dixon. And from that point, from about fifth grade, sixth grade, up through high school, we lived in that same home in a very, very Spartan environment. But we were happy. We were normal. We had a lot of neighborhood friends. We stayed out of trouble, thank the good Lord. And I think that was due in great part to my mother and my grandmother trying to keep us on the straight and narrow. Sometime during my tenure in grade school and perhaps early on in high school, I had taken a paper route for the Dixon Evening Telegraph. The Dixon Evening Telegraph, owned by the Shaw family, and my brother and I carried what was at the time, and perhaps still may be, one of the longest paper routes in Dixon. Now this was back in the 50s, and we had 101 papers that we covered a long distance. And I always think it's ironic because the Shaw scenario, and knowing Ben Shaw and some of the older Shaws, would transcend into a scenario where today, as a 73-year-old man, we still have a relationship with the Shaws in the sense that that company now owns the local paper here in DeKalb. But we'll chat about that in a few minutes. While in high school, I had to continue to work, and I took a job as a clerk and as a janitor at the JCPenney store, washing windows and sweeping floors. And I befriended the manager, a fellow by the name of Wayne Hirschberger, and I liked what I was doing. And I enjoyed sweeping floors. I enjoyed washing windows. I enjoyed meeting some of the other clerks and got to know them. And Wayne saw something perhaps in me, and I remember promoted me to be a salesperson on Friday nights and Saturdays, and I had just a heck of a good time doing that. Fast forward to my senior year, because of our background in Dixon and because of the fact that we were kids from the wrong side of the tracks, if you will, it had been pretty much determined, even though I had good grades, that I was not a college-bound student. I had accepted a position after having worked at JCPenney and then later for a CPA in in Dixon, Bill Wolf, that I was going to take a $60 a week full-time job at the R&S shoe store in Dixon. Wow, big money, $60 a week. My family was elated. Wayne Hirschberger, this manager at the JCPenney store, after chatting with me one day and asking me what I was going to do, I told him that I was going to take this job. He got so upset. He did one of these numbers on me and said, "Jerry, I'm going to take you to DeKalb College." I'll never forget. He didn't say Northern Illinois. He said DeKalb College. And to my recollection, over the next several weeks, we would make a visit to Northern. I would take a battery of tests, and now this was probably June of 1961, after having graduated from Dixon High School. And by August, I was at Neptune West as a student at Northern. I had 2 or 3 shirts to my name, 2 or 3 pair of pants, no money. So I had to work. I worked for a gal by the name of Marjorie Hamilton, who was the supervisor in the Neptune Central cafeteria. My first position, I'll never forget it, I washed pots and pans. And I used to hate fried chicken nights, because if you ever washed a pan after a chicken or 2 or 3 or 4 had been baked, it was full of grease and oh. And I remember that first year, I used to have nightmares almost about these large flat pans attacking me. And so something told me that there might be a better position than washing pots and pans. And I came upon an opportunity to visit Roy Campbell, who was the advisor of the Northern Star, the campus newspaper, which at the time I believe was publishing 2 or 3 days a week. And so I met him in some of the old barracks buildings down on Lucinda Avenue. This must have been 1962, now 63, and applied, worked for the Northern Star. Still needed money, loved sports, worked for Sports Information. Loved sports so much that I worked for the Northern Yearbook. Enjoyed talking, surprise, and worked for WNIC. So at one time, I was working with the Northern Star, WNIC, which was the campus radio station, and Sports Information. You know, for a poor kid from Dixon, doing pretty well. And so I went through school, and I was on the 5-year plan, I think because I worked hard and I took fewer hours, that it was not until 1966 that I got my degree from Northern. Back a year or 2 before I graduated, I had the opportunity to, or I had heard about the opportunity that WLBK, big time radio, now here's a college kid working at WNIC, was hiring, and they were looking for a weekend news person. Well, as a journalism student and as someone who had experience now significantly with campus media, I applied. I walked into WLBK, which at the time was located on North First Street here in DeKalb, and the first person that met me at the door was Bob Brown, who was the station manager then, was one of the first folks that George Bigger had hired when he started WLBK in 1947. And I remember saying, I'm Jerry Smith, and he said, hi, I'm Bob Brown. I'm Brown from the Sun. And so it broke the ice, and I was hired, and then worked off and on part-time for WLBK through my graduation in 1966. In 1965, WLBK was sold. George Bigger sold that to Jerry Cerny, and Jerry Cerny brought his station manager up from Joliet, WJOL, and that fellow's name was Ralph Sherman. Well, so I got to work for the Shermans and Jerry Cerny for about a year. Graduated in '66. That was a time when, frankly, if you had a degree and you could walk, you would probably be hired. I mean, I think the kids today would relish at the thought of having a scenario like that. I was interviewed, had been told that a teaching job might be something that I'd be interested in. It was, so I accepted my first teaching job in 1966 after graduating at Caneland High School. And I was a teacher in English and journalism and advised the school yearbook there. And here I was, 23 years old. I bought the first new car that I'd ever had. You know, I was in Fat City. And sometime in November or December of 1966, while I was at Caneland, I get a draft notice. Now, remember, those were the days when teachers weren't drafted? It depended on your local board. My local board in Dixon needed guys. They said you ought to report to the Dixon, Illinois train station and in January of something. And to make a long story short, I did get a deferment based on the fact that the school said, we don't want you to take this teacher out at mid-year. So I was deferred until June of that year, of June of 1967. And I was drafted. I went to Fort Leonard Wood. You know, as Jim Barker and others that asked us to do this, they asked that we bring a few pictures, etc. And one of the things that I had found as I went through a lot of material was some things that I had saved from my first job at Caneland High School. And I saw this, and it begs the question, and I'm sure a number of you can empathize with this, why do we save so much stuff? Well, this was a card that a young lady, she was in my class at Caneland High School, and this card says, "May your military career be glorious, honorable, noble, and short." Now let me read, if I may, what this young girl, here was a senior in high school, I was just a young 23-year-old teacher. She said, "Mr. Smith, boy do I mean short too. I know I'm not the only one that's going to miss you. Denise and I cried all the way to the buses Thursday." She had stopped crying in homeroom, but that's where I started. Then after school, we had to say goodbye again. Then we started all over again. Well, have fun in the Army, and don't forget to come and see us at Caneland when you're on leave, because you know you'll be welcomed. Isn't that something that a student would write this to a kid who was drafted? So anyway, that was in 1967. My first experience in the Army as a draftee was at basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I think I went in June of '67. Hot, red clay, by this time still 23 years old. But I was old. Most of the kids there were young and 18, 19, 20 years old, physical specimens. I was not. But got through basic training and was blessed to go to Fort McPherson, Georgia for a few months. While I was in Atlanta at Fort McPherson, and I had a very, very good job as a private, making $90 a month in the U.S. Army. I got a call from a name that was familiar to me, Bob Neal. Well, Bob Neal was the news director at WQXI in Atlanta. Bob and I had worked at WLBK in DeKalb. Bob is a Northern grad. And Bob said, we need a weekend newsman. So on weekends in Atlanta, I was making about $90 a weekend. In one weekend, I was making more or about the same as I was making as a buck private from the Army. During this time, this was 67, everybody who was in the Army seemingly was going to Vietnam. And I resigned myself to the fact that as a young draftee that I would probably go to Vietnam, and I was willing to serve. Well, one levy came down, wouldn't you know it, they needed 20 guys to go to Germany. So for the next 18 months of my military career, I worked in Germany. I worked for the American Forces Radio Network, attached to the 3rd Infantry Division, had a great time. I tell you what the Army has done for me. The Army has said to me, you know, I think every kid, every young person in this country should be conscripted to do some kind of service for their country. Now, that could be forestry service, that could be nursing, that could be peacetime, whatever. If they choose military, that would be an option. But those 2 years that I had resulted in my becoming a better person, my having a chance to see the world, my having a chance to make friends that to this very day remain friends of mine. I have a few pictures if I'd like to share. Can you believe that that is me? How's that? In 1967, this was in the Public Information Office in Würzburg, Germany. Third person from the left. Who is that? That skinny kid. This was a picture taken in July of '69 by friends of mine. We all worked together at the Public Information Office for the 3rd Infantry Division. And these friends are still friends of mine. Doyle Wenzel, who lives in Washington State. Gary Mulhall lives in Washington State. Bill Pearson, who lives in Michigan. Good friends of mine, but we worked together in the Army. So, fast forward to 1969. I received my separation papers and was released from the Army in 1969. Now, at the time, Canelan High School was obligated to hire me back. However, they didn't necessarily have to hire me back in the position that I had before, or that I had when I left in 1967. It turned out that the scenario was such that they wanted me to teach a few things that I just didn't feel equipped to teach. And so I decided that I would look around to see what other options there might be. I went to what then was a small weekly newspaper operation called DeKalb County Press. And the general manager there had been recently hired by its owner, John Castle. And that new general manager was Ralph Sherman, who had been at WLBK, had then opted to leave, and he got into the printing and newspaper publishing business. They were looking for an editor, and wouldn't you know it, after having met with John Castle and Ralph Sherman and in the Shamrock Bar on 3rd Street in DeKalb, I like to tell them that they plied me with too many beers. That probably is not the case, but make a long story short, I went to work for DeKalb County Press in 1969, and that began a 30-year career at DeKalb County Press, which would become Castle Communications, which would ultimately become Castle Print Tech. I do have a few pictures of those days. There I am as the editor of 5 weekly newspapers. We had 2 weeklies in Sycamore, a weekly in Genoa, a weekly in Kirkland, and a brand new weekly in DeKalb called the DeKalb Journal. And this was in 1969. Here's another picture I pulled. I don't know what was making me so happy, probably because I had just gotten a big job in newspapering in DeKalb, Illinois. And that's at my desk there on our office on Industrial Drive. We had 5 weekly newspapers, and at some point along that way, we, as a company, after having competed as weekly papers against the one daily in DeKalb, the Daily Chronicle, DeKalb Chronicle, we made the decision that we were going to upgrade our product. So we came out with a paper called the Sunday Journal. And I'm looking at this now, September 1969. And that was the first announcement that we had started a Sunday paper. The Chronicle was 6 days a week. We had been just once a week as weekly papers. So we had the Sunday Journal. Well, the response to the Sunday Journal was so good that on April 12th of 1970, we announced we're going daily. Well, now perhaps that didn't mean a big thing to a lot of folks, but anybody who was in the newspaper business or in the media business, this was big stuff. And so in April of 1970, here's the headline of that paper. Good morning. Consolidation of 4 weeklies nets a new morning daily newspaper. One of the nice things about this scenario is that it resulted in one of the few 2 newspaper competing scenarios in the country on a community our size. And for a year and a half, the DeKalb County Journal competed against the Daily Chronicle. And now, to set that stage, the Daily Chronicle was an old established paper. Afternoons, evenings, we came out as a morning daily. We also had the Sunday product. Ralph Sherman, the publisher, I was named the editor of that paper. We competed vigorously during that 71 scenario for about a year and a half. There are some who would say the DeKalb County Journal had the Chronicle on the run. I don't know if that was really the case or not. But during this time, I had the good fortune of competing against a gentleman who I knew as a student at Northern in 1963. And his name's Barry Schrader. And Barry was the editor of the Chronicle. I was the editor of the Journal. We competed back and forth. And one of the nice things that Jim Barker is going to do is to have a similar lifetime scenario, if you will, between Barry and I. And so I will deflect a lot of the comments about what we did during that time for that particular scenario. But having said that, we competed and we really, really did well.
So you know you're about the 30-minute mark now.
Okay, it was obvious in 1971 that even though two newspapers in a small community this size were putting out good products, only one would probably survive. At the time, our owner, John Castle, and the Chronicle's owner, Hagedorn Newspapers, out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and its owner, Duane Hagedorn, those two gentlemen got together, I think started getting together in 1971, and it may have boiled down to who was gonna buy whom, whether the Chronicle was gonna sell to the Journal or the Journal was gonna sell to the Chronicle. Well, as a sidelight to this scenario, the DeKalb County Journal operation, DeKalb County Press, our commercial printing side had started on a project of producing quarter-fold TV booklets. And it had become so successful that I think it made John Castle's decision to sell to the Chronicle easier. So in 1971, end of the year, December 31, the DeKalb County Journal ceased publication. The circulation list, which at the time numbered about 5,300, was sold to the Chronicle. And it was a tough scenario. About 4 weeks prior to the closing of that newspaper, I was told as the editor, and I was told that we were going to close the paper, cease publication on December 31. However, I was told not to tell our staff. So for those final 3 or 4 weeks of publishing a top drawer newspaper with top drawer young aggressive reporters, I as the editor knew that that was going to come to an end, but I couldn't tell anybody. Tough 3 weeks, probably 3 of the toughest weeks I've had in my career, if you will. But that did pass. The Castles were very, very generous in severance and vacation pay and all that, and so we sold that. And so that was an end to the newspapering. That was in 71, 72. In 1973, 74, our commercial printing business became very, very successful. We were printing over 1 million copies each and every week of TV books and newspapers, etc., for other newspapers in the area. And during those next few years, I was involved in editorial, I was involved in production, I was involved in sales. We had a great run at Castle Communications. Brought along a few pictures here. There was a young Jerry Smith. I think I used that picture during our early days at DeKalb County Press. Who's that kid in front of all those rolls of newspaper, that newsprint? That was me. This was Castle Communications. It's been great to do this program, frankly, because I've had the opportunity to look at some of these old pictures. So we continued. I was named president in 1983 and would remain at Castle until 1999 after a very, very good 30-year career. Now, I'd like to chat a few minutes, if I may, about the personal side of my life and about my family, which to this day is, as it is with so many of you, the most important part of your life. I received a call in 1972 from Avi Bass, who was on the staff at the journalism department at Northern, that a young Filipina Fulbright scholar from the Philippines, Agapita Palma, had learned that President Marcos in the Philippines had proclaimed martial law, and she was not in a scenario to go home right away, so she was looking for position. And we at the time at Castle were so busy. I mean, we were running 3 shifts. And Agapita, her name's Ging was hired as a 3rd shift proofreader. Well, to make a long story short, we met in '72 after having her come aboard. And we were married in 1974. I brought a few pictures to share of some of our early days. Here's Ging and I. That was probably circa 1970, 75, 76. Here's another picture that Ging took. Look at that hair. Can you believe that? This was back at a time I remember I was getting my hair cut at a place called the Matador down on 3rd Street in DeKalb, and guys they weren't getting haircuts at the time, they were getting permanents. And so I went down and got something similar to that. And I came back home. Ging and I had been married, and we were living in Sycamore at the time. And I remember I waltzed in, and I said, "Well, Ging, how do I look?" And she said, "You look like a fruitcake." So I don't know how long that permanent lasted, but as we know, hairstyles come and go. Ging and I were blessed to have 1 child. 5 years after we were married, which was in '74, in 1979, Eric Don Smith was born on February 2, Groundhog Baby, at Kishwaukee Hospital. And we've been blessed, and Eric's had a great career. Shortly after we were married, Ging accepted a position at Kishwaukee College, where she spent 28 years working her career. She was a journalism instructor, moved up to become the Dean of Development at Kishwaukee College, and just had a great career. One of the pictures that I recall, this was taken, I can't recall, but this is Ging and I, along with Norm Jenkins, who was the 2nd president at Kishwaukee. You know, one of the nice things about having lived in an area so long is that I've had the opportunity to, meet all of the presidents at Kishwaukee College and a number of presidents at Northern Illinois. And a lot of people, as a matter of fact, will still say to me, "Now, you worked at the university, did you not?" No. The answer is no. I've never been an employee of the university. As a proud alum, I can say very proud that I'm a Husky. Ging is an alum with a master's degree. Ging has the brains. I have the brawn in our family. She's proud to be a Husky. During the early years of our life with Eric, we made the decision to build a home in DeKalb, and we built a home on Buena Vista Drive, adjacent to the Buena Vista Golf Course. And Eric must have been 5 or 6 years old at the time. Well, he loved to play golf, and he would go to that putting green, and he would play golf. And I'll never forget a scenario. This must have been late 80s, and Dick Silverman was the postmaster at the DeKalb post office. Dick had been there seemingly for years. And Dick and Clarence Messier were having coffee, or perhaps something stronger, at the Buena Vista Golf Course. And Dick Silverman called me. I was at Castle in my office at the time, and he says, "Jerry, that boy of yours, Eric, sure likes to golf, doesn't he?" He said, "It's starting to rain out here, and this kid is continuing to hit ball after ball after ball out of this sand trap." And so yeah, Eric played golf. One of the best stages of our life were during those early days when Eric played junior golf, Illinois junior golf, American junior golf, and was recruited then by a number of schools, including Kentucky, Miami of Ohio. We made a visit to Northwestern, to Notre Dame. Eric was a pretty fair golfer, and one of the schools that really wanted him because of a friendship that I had had with an old-time college teacher of mine, Jack Phoenix, who was the golf coach at Northern. Jack really wanted to see Eric stay in town. Well, after a long deliberative process, and Eric and I did a lot of very meaningful, heartfelt father-son meetings over breakfast and all that, doing the pros and cons of Eric leaving home and going to wherever or staying in town. He decided to stay at Northern Illinois, pleased his mother to no end. And Eric then, as a result, graduated in 2003 from Northern. And after having a stellar career as a high school golfer at Marmion Academy in Aurora, graduated and played golf, and has now, as he likes to tell me, still likes to golf, but he has to work for a living. Lives in Peoria, happily married, and but his golfing career meant so much to us. During this time when Ging was at Kishwaukee and I was at Castle Communications, I had a scenario, frankly, that few managers, few executives of small companies like Castle Communications had. And that was an owner, John Castle, and his wife, Nancy, who were so supportive of my staying involved in the community. So during this tenure, where I was president of Castle Communications and where I was running a company that had ballooned to about 100 employees, and we were doing very, very well, saw the value of my getting involved with organizations like the United Way, Kishwaukee Hospital, the DeKalb County Economic Development Corporation, and that list went on and on. And so during this interim, or during this career at Castle, I was fortunate to stay involved in our community big time, as was Ging. So we were blessed. Here we were raising one child and doing very, very successful in our careers. And to this day, I thank the Castles for giving me the flexibility to do so many of the things that I wanted to do. And during this time, we had a real rough period. I remember in 2000 or in the late 90s, we had some up and downs organizationally, but I can honestly say that I think I can probably only count on one hand the number of times during that 30-year career at Castle where I had any real major disappointments. You know what? All of us in our lives at some point say, is this all there is? There must be something here. So when I was about the 28, 29 year mark, I remember chatting with John casually over lunch someday, John Castle. I said, John, I think when I hit 30, I'm going to find something else. I will be 55 years old at the time. And John didn't believe me, and I said to Ging when I got home, Ging, you know, I think I'm going to be leaving and trying to find something else. Ging didn't believe me. Who would leave a position that was meaningful, that was frankly put a good meal on the table each and every night. But I was bound and determined that this is something I wanted to do. In 1898, Dick Ubel, who had been hired as the first executive director on a part-time basis of an organization, the DeKalb County Community Foundation, which was started in 1993, Dick had told the founders of the Community Foundation, Charlie and Mary Roberts, that he wanted to retire, and by this time the Community Foundation started with a major gift of over $3 million by the Roberts family, and run in a wonderful way the first few years by Dick Ubel, had risen in assets to $8, $9, $10 million. Sensational for a community this size. Well, Dick had heard that I was thinking of possibly seeking new opportunities, and we had lunch, I'll never forget, in November or December of 1998. And he said, you know, they're going to be hiring their first full-time executive director at the Community Foundation. Is that something you'd be interested in? The more I thought about it, I said, you know, this might be a good fit. The Community Foundation is there to serve the nonprofits, to serve folks who want to give back to their communities. Yeah, I think that's something that I'd like to do. So what evolved from that short meeting in 98 through late summer of 99 was a scenario where I interviewed for the Community Foundation position, was offered the position. During this time, the Castles had, after chatting with their children, had determined that none of their kids wanted to stay in the printing business. And with my leaving and having no one to assume that leadership, they had asked me in the spring of 1999 to help them find a new owner. So here I am, having decided to leave a 30-year career at Castle, having the responsibility of helping the Castles find a new owner for their business, and realizing that I was going to embark on an opportunity in a position that I had very little experience in. The one thing I did bring to the Community Foundation, I think, that the board was very comfortable at the time, was that because of that scenario at Castle, I had a good handle on the community. I knew the movers, the shakers, who was doing what, you know, whatever. And I also was in a position, because of my journalism background, and, you know, I'm not afraid to walk up to anyone and shake their hand and introduce myself. I was a good fit. So that was a position that I assumed for the next 10 years, from 1999 through 2008, to the end of 2008. Those were the best 10 years, 10 of the best years that I'll ever have. The Community Foundation is an organization that allows folks to give back to the communities where they've lived, where they worked, where they raised their family. It's all about endowment. It's all about taking a portion of those funds and giving back to the community. when I assumed the leadership position at the Community Foundation in 1999, and Dick Ubel had grown that thing to close to $10 million in assets. We just took it on a new chapter, if you will. And over the next 10 years, during some rough times, if you recall, this was 2008, 2009, the bottom had fallen out of the market. People were hesitant to forsake some of their 401k dollars, if you will, to at that point give it to charity, even though those charitable purposes were good ones. So we went through a rough period, but that too passed. And by the time I decided to retire in 1999, 2008, 2009, the Community Foundation had reached assets of about $25 million, in a position to give back over $1 million back into the nonprofit community. So I'm very, very proud of some of the programs we had. I was the only full-time person. I hired Rita Anderson after having been at the Community Foundation a year. In 1995, it was in 2005. I have my fives mixed up here. In 2005, we needed a program director at the Community Foundation. I realized that I could just do so much. We hired a fellow from the Youth Services Bureau, Dan Templin. And Dan is now the executive director of the Community Foundation. And that organization now is $40 million, $45 million in assets. Probably 3, 4, 5 full-time employees, doing a great job. One of my proudest accomplishments, I think, at the Community Foundation here, in addition to working with folks who really wanted to give back to their community through endowment, was working with other community foundations across the state of Illinois in building the Alliance of Illinois Community Foundations. Before we leave this life of Jerry Smith, a couple of things I wanted to share. One is a picture that I pulled from our TV room. One of the best pictures, sometimes you have a lot of pictures of a family, but a few stand out as some of your favorites. This is one of my favorites because it was one of the happiest moments of my life. This was Eric Ging and I at the retirement party that the Community Foundation gave me at the Farm Bureau. And, not only was I so pleased after having done a nice job at the Community Foundation and being rewarded with such a great position, but to have Eric come up from Peoria, and it was wonderful. Now, before I leave, I wanted to share one thing with you, and that is my mother. We started this, the Life of Jerry Smith program with a picture of my mother, my brother, and I. This is a picture of my mother, 97 years old, and that's me there. And what is so interesting in this picture is that this is a 1956 Packard owned by a good friend of ours who lives in DeKalb, Ralph Tompkins. Ralph Tompkins, ironically, is a native of Franklin Grove, Illinois. My father, Scott Smith, and his family, a native of Franklin Grove, Illinois. So my mother, after having learned that Ralph Tompkins had a 1956 Packard in which she remembers writing as a young woman. We went to Dixon. Ralph and I and my mother took a ride in this 1956 Packard. Had a great time. You would have thought my mother had a new boyfriend at 97 years old. And, you know, that whole scenario of Ralph having learned that my mother, after having lost his mother at age 98, just a year ago, saying to me, "Do you think your mother would enjoy a ride in the Packard?" I said, "Ralph, I think she'd love it." She loved it. And, but to have friends like Ralph Tompkins, to have scenarios where my mother is still alive and still very, very cogent, it is just marvelous. As we close this, I'd like to just chat a little bit about my life and the fact that I've received a lot of thank yous, been blessed to receive a number of awards. Some of the awards that I've been most proud of, frankly, and I've received a number of them from Northern and from other organizations, have been a few that were given to not Jerry Smith, but Jerry and Ging Smith. The DeKalb Kiwanis Club, the DeKalb Rotary Club gave an award years ago, the Jim Forster Community Award. Ging and I were awarded that. Ging and I were both awarded through the Boy Scouts of America the Tribute to Heroes Award, given to folks who, according to the scenario there, give selflessly of themselves to the community. And Ging and I received that. One of the awards that we received together has the name of John Roberts, John C. Roberts, who for years was a lifelong president on the Kishwaukee College Board. And the John C. Roberts Community Service Award was given by Kishwaukee College to Ging and I several years ago. So it's been a great, great run, whether that be from Dixon High School. Thank you, Wayne Hirschberger, for giving me the opportunity to go to DeKalb College. Thank you, John and Nancy Castle, for giving me the opportunity to get involved in this community. Thank you, Dick Ubel and Charlie and Mary Roberts, for giving this guy the opportunity to work with folks at the DeKalb County Community Foundation. And thank you, Ging and Eric, for making the 40-some plus years that we've been married, and fathers to you, Eric, mother and father to you, so rewarding. This has been a great career. I am so proud to be a 55-year member of the DeKalb community. And if the good Lord is willing, Ging and I will have many, many more. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you today.